Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. Today, we're diving into a lesser-known battlefield of the Cold War, one fought not with bullets, but with headlines, airwaves, and whispers behind closed doors. This is the origin story of how US intelligence fused with media to shape minds, win hearts, and steer history. And trust me, it's not just a relic of the past. What began in the late 1940s still casts shadows on how we see the world today. So let's set the stage. The Cold War didn't start with a bang. It began with unease, paranoia, and a slow drift into rivalry. From 1945 to 1950, the former wartime allies, the United States and the Soviet Union, quickly turned adversaries. And in this new world where nuclear weapons loomed in the background, influence became the real currency of power. Who could shape public opinion faster? Who could control the narrative better? Propaganda, once a wartime tool, became a strategic weapon in peacetime geopolitics. Right in the middle of this rising tension, the United States took a bold step. In 1947, the National Security Act was passed, giving birth to a new kind of agency, the CIA. But this wasn't your traditional spy outfit. Yes, it dealt with foreign espionage, but its reach would grow far beyond that. Soon, it would begin operating in a murkier realm, public perception. Here's where things get especially interesting. Leaders quickly realized that war wasn't just about troops or treaties. It was about stories. The media, once considered a neutral conveyor of facts, suddenly became a tool of national strategy. Radio broadcasts, newspaper headlines, televised speeches, these weren't just reports. They were weapons. Think about that. In a world where information travels faster than tanks, the ability to influence what people believe can be more powerful than the ability to mobilize troops. Media became a battlefield, and both sides wanted to control it. Now that the media had become a battlefield, the question was, how do you fight a war with headlines and airtime? Enter Operation Mockingbird. This wasn't a rumor. It was a real, classified initiative by the CIA to shape global news. And not from the sidelines, they got right into the newsroom. Imagine over 400 journalists, editors, and executives, some knowingly, others not, working behind the scenes with the CIA to influence what the public read, watched, and believed. That's not a fringe conspiracy. That's documented history. Let's talk about the strategy. First, massive recruitment. These weren't just freelancers writing op-eds. We're talking about people embedded in respected outlets, major newspapers, wire services, even overseas correspondents. Their job? Shape narratives, kill certain stories, push others, quietly, effectively, sometimes even patriotically. Second, strategic platforms. The agency didn't just rely on minor publications. It used the big names. Time magazine, CBS News, the New York Times. These weren't just media giants, they became silent conduits. Without public knowledge, these trusted platforms served as megaphones for agency-approved messaging, a kind of journalism with an invisible hand. And third, tactical manipulation. Stories weren't just suggested, they were planted. Opposition voices, especially abroad, were discredited or silenced. In some cases, foreign correspondents were secretly intelligence officers themselves. The line between reporting the truth and manufacturing it blurred beyond recognition. Operation Mockingbird wasn't about lying in the traditional sense. It was about control, curating a version of reality, piece by piece, article by article, until the public saw what they were supposed to see. And remember, this wasn't just about the Soviet Union. The audience was also us, the American people. So, what happens when a government manipulates the media over time, not for some short-term emergency, but as a permanent feature of its foreign policy toolkit? This slide is where we move from tactics to consequences. Let's begin with the concept of unseen incentives. When you fund something through classified budgets, behind closed doors, with no public oversight, you remove the natural checks and balances that keep institutions honest. There's no accountability, no market pressure, no audience to walk away in protest. That creates a dangerous environment, where the motives aren't driven by truth or service, but by power and secrecy. It's like playing poker with a rigged deck, and only one side knows it's marked. Then there's eroded trust. Think about it. When citizens are constantly fed narratives that serve foreign policy objectives rather than objective reality, what happens to the public's ability to discern truth? You end up with a population that believes it's informed, but is actually following a script. And over time, the damage becomes cultural, generational, deep, and finally, suppressed pluralism. In a healthy democracy, a variety of voices compete in what we call the marketplace of ideas. But when the state secretly props up certain narratives and quietly smothers dissent, that competition dies. Independent journalism struggles to survive, not because it's wrong, but because it's inconvenient. The scary part? This doesn't require brute force. It only takes time, secrecy, and silence. And once truth becomes flexible, bendable to the needs of the moment, then everything else in a democracy begins to wobble. 2. Eventually, the silence broke. In 1975, the United States Senate launched something extraordinary, a deep investigation into the intelligence community's overreach. It was called the Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church of Idaho. And for a moment, the curtain was pulled back. The hearings revealed what many had suspected but couldn't prove, that the CIA had been running extensive domestic media operations. Journalists were being paid, stories were being manipulated, public perception had become a target, sometimes more important than any foreign adversary. These weren't vague accusations. They were detailed, documented, and shocking. But here's the twist. Even with public outrage, despite front-page headlines and primetime coverage, real institutional accountability never fully arrived. Reforms were discussed. Some were implemented, but much of the machinery stayed intact. The system bent, but it didn't break. And as for the media, rather than dismantle their quiet partnerships, many outlets simply pivoted. They deflected criticism, distanced themselves from direct involvement, and, most importantly, let the public attention fade. Some operations may have ended. Others were just moved behind different doors, or handed off to private contractors. Same tactics, different packaging. So what did we learn? That exposing the truth doesn't guarantee change. Not when the systems in place are designed to absorb shock, then return to normal. And in that gap, between what's revealed and what's reformed, trust continues to wither. Now, let's fast forward. You might be thinking, sure, that was the 70s. We're in a different world now. But are we really? Today's media battlefield doesn't run on typewriters or radio broadcasts. It runs on algorithms, data pipelines, and content moderation dashboards. But the goal? That hasn't changed. It's still about shaping perception, quietly, strategically, and often invisibly. In recent years, documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, yes, official, verified records, have confirmed what many feared. Intelligence agencies have maintained close relationships with major tech companies, not just for tracking threats, but for steering narratives. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook have been caught coordinating with government agencies to suppress certain viewpoints, amplify others, and flag what counts as disinformation. But who defines that term? And what happens when being labeled misleading is just a stand-in for inconvenient? Private censorship adds another layer. Content moderation policies are framed as neutral, but they often reflect geopolitical aims or institutional pressure. Independent journalists get shadow banned. Whistleblowers disappear from feeds. The architecture of influence no longer needs a newsroom, it lives in a server farm. And remember, there's no need to hide this coordination anymore. Today, it's dressed in the language of safety, public health, or national security. The story is the same, only the wrapping has changed. The Cold War may be over, but the war over what we believe, that's alive and well. Let's end with the most uncomfortable truth of all. No system, no matter how polished or powerful, can control public perception unless we, the public, allow it. That's the bitter lesson buried in every document we've covered. Operation Mockingbird, the Church Committee, the algorithmic filtering of truth, none of it works without our silence, our distraction, or our willingness to outsource critical thinking. When you trace the arc of history, one pattern becomes clear. The centralization of truth, whether through media monopolies, government partnerships, or tech platforms, always comes at the cost of individual awareness. The moment we stop asking who benefits from a narrative is the moment we become part of its machinery. And that brings us to responsibility, not just to demand transparency, but to practice discernment, to read widely, to think freely, to notice when all the headlines seem to point in the same direction, and ask why. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves singing the same song, wondering how we ended up here again. So as this story closes, ask yourself, what does it mean to stay truly informed in a world designed to inform you selectively? That's not just a historical question, it's a moral one. If this episode opened your eyes, don't let it stop here. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the hidden stories that shaped our world. And if you want to take this conversation further, check out the podcast version of this episode. The link's right there in the description. And hey, if you made it this far, you're already doing the work. Keep asking questions. Until next time, this is Truth Behind History, where the past isn't dead, it's just classified.